Hello, so this is Dr. Kevin Hall, and for fellow nutrition nerds, you will know who he is. If you are not a nutrition nerd, he is one of the world's experts in metabolism, and he was funded by the Nutrition Science Initiative
and NIH.
And the NIH to do a metabolic ward study, and I am just going to ask him to talk us through what he found.
Sure. So basically, we were really interested in the idea of trying to test this carbohydrate insulin hypothesis for obesity, which posits that basically obesity is caused primarily because of high insulin levels, which are driving fat into fat cells, starving the rest of the body, and thereby basically causing increased hunger and decreased energy expenditure. So one of the logical consequences of that model of obesity, if it's correct, is that if I take people who are overweight and have class 1 obesity, if I then swap out, keep the calories the same, but swap out carbohydrates for fat, and in particular if you crank down the carbohydrates really low to 5% of total calories and increase fat to 80% of total calories, that you would reverse some of these things. And if I clamp basically the number of calories, then I'm not going to be able to test the effects on hunger, but I will be able to test the effects on energy expenditures.
And so if the insulin hypothesis is the correct hypothesis, what would the expectation of this study have been?
Right, so there are two predictions. One, because you decrease the number of carbs dramatically, you should decrease insulin secretion. That should release the fat from the fat cells. You should therefore get increased fat loss from the body, and you should also then, because you've relieved the starvation of this internal starvation, you should increase energy expenditure. And previous folks have suggested that that should be 400 to 600 calories a day of extra energy expenditure.
And that would explain for them why ketogenic low-carb diets would be beneficial for weight loss beyond calorie as a calorie.
Right, essentially the idea that I can eat whatever I want, and I can actually eat maybe even more calories slightly than I was eating on a previous high carbohydrate diet, and yet still lose weight and body fat. You can't get that for free, so you've got to increase energy expenditure.
And so how long was this? This was a 1-month study?
This is a 2-month inpatient metabolic ward study. People in 17 overweight and class 1 obese subjects. I know I just screwed up my first
That's okay,
first
it happens to the best of us.
Okay.
And so what were the findings? Let's go through.
Yeah.
I'm going to just now shift over to your, so you want to use your hands to point at things.
So here is the study design, basically. 2 months on-site metabolic ward. Basically the first period is a baseline diet, high carbohydrate diet, 25% of total calories coming from sugar, and every week they spend 2 days inside a metabolic chamber. And basically what we do is over the first period of time we adjust the number of calories to match what they were burning inside the chamber, so that we put them in energy balance inside the chamber, and then we clamp the calories for the rest of the period of time and switch them to an 80% fat, 5% carbohydrate diet, keeping protein clamped all the way along.
And there's no opportunity to cheat here. These are people who are, sadly for them, I imagine, in a locked ward in a sense.
They are in a locked ward in that sense. They can have visitors, but they have to have their visitors in public. They have to eat all of their food in front.
Who does this? Who did you find to actually do this for 2 months?
We found 17 very motivated people to do this.
Amazing.
They were compensated, let's just say that.
They were. This could not have been a cheap study. So then, results-wise, let's talk us through the results.
Okay, so one of the interesting things was that despite the fact that we were trying to put them in energy balance in the chamber, and we were actually able to do that, outside the chamber they actually burn more calories. Not too surprising in retrospect, but we actually were surprised by the magnitude of how many more calories they were burning outside the chambers. Upwards of 500 calories a day, more outside the chamber than inside the chamber. So what that meant was that we were feeding them more or less in balance in the chamber, but we were underfeeding them outside the chamber.
And that's simply because they were in the chamber and weren't doing very much?
It's a small room.
They can't exactly exercise a great deal.
Exactly. So that's the other part. We tried to clamp the physical activity as much as possible. 3 30-minute sessions at fixed wattage on cycle ergometry every day for the entire period of time.
And I imagine unlimited bandwidth for their internet connections?
Yes, exactly. Lots of television, lots of internet.
Okay, so then back to the results.
Okay, so what happened? The blue period of time, this is the last 15 days of the baseline run-in high carbohydrate diet, so they're losing weight slightly. It's a roughly 300 calorie a day negative energy balance overall. They're losing fat over this period of time. We switch them to the low carbohydrate diet. They lose a good chunk of weight, about 1.6 kilos right away. Interestingly, and I think most importantly for the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis, is that the fat mass slowed.
So the loss of fat mass slowed down.
Yes, exactly.
On a low carb, high fat diet.
That's correct, yes.
Which is certainly not what would be predicted.
The prediction was you drop insulin, you increase lipolysis, you increase the amount of fat burning, and therefore you should release those trapped fat from the fat cells, you reduce body fat. This is measured by DEXA.
But that's certainly not what was found here.
That was not what was found here.
Okay.
We actually saw a slowing of the fat loss. In fact, it took the full 28 days on the ketogenic diet to lose the same amount of fat as the first 15 days.
Sorry, so the first 15 days of the control diet,
the baseline run-in diet,
people lost as much fat as the study diet with the low carb, high fat.
That's correct, but more weight.
Right.
So they
lost from lean mass.
Yes, and in fact, one of the things that we measured, which is not shown on the poster, is we measured 24-hour urinary nitrogen excretion, which is an index of how much protein is being utilized. That went up over the first period of the ketogenic diet, so they're actually losing protein as well as water.
Now, how fast was that weight loss? And so it looks like it's only just 2 kilograms over 28 days, so it's basically a pound and change a week.
Yeah, but you can see that this period of time, right, very shortly after introducing the ketogenic diet at time 0, you get this rapid weight loss, which is then relatively stable.
So the only reason I was asking is having seen studies in the past where rapid loss was associated with disproportionate loss of lean tissue.
Right.
So I wondered whether or not that was what we're seeing, but it doesn't seem like they lost fast enough for that to have happened.
Right. I think that what you're really seeing here is you're seeing it's not a huge amount of protein loss. You're seeing a transient loss of protein, which is essentially slowing down the fat loss transiently, and then that sort of picks back up again after you've got that transient flood of protein. And we know that insulin, for example, does suppress proteolysis, so it's not that surprising based on the physiology. What I'm showing here is the fact that we've actually done what we've said. This is 24-hour C-peptide in the urine. It's an index of how much insulin is secreted over the course of the day. You can see that that drops by 50% in the ketogenic diet. So we're actually doing what we said that we were doing.
Okay, we've got 3 more graphs to muddle through for the people who are listening. There are 14 people listening.
14, awesome. All right, so really quickly, basically the energy expenditure in the chambers, this is the total number of calories burned while they were spending those 2 days a week inside the chamber. You can see that the induction of the ketogenic diet does cause a slight increase. It's a very slight increase.
Not as much as would have been expected.
Nowhere near.
So this looks like to me from here, with the error bars, of course, but it looks about 100 calories a day extra on a ketogenic diet as far as burning goes.
And then it goes away.
Okay.
So
again, not what we would have
linearly
hoped for.
over. Yeah, exactly. And you can see that there's a big chunk of that is in sleeping metabolic rate, which again wanes away over time. And then finally, they are shifting quickly to fat oxidation.
So there's a question from Catherine. She wants to know if it goes completely away, but it looks like you haven't done a long enough study to necessarily conclude one way or the other. Maybe it goes back up, maybe it goes down,
who knows?
Maybe it stops.
Yeah, who knows? But I guess one would have to postulate some very interesting physiological phenomenon to suggest that it goes back up.
I'm sure people will.
Everybody will. It's never going to be long enough. It's never going to be extreme enough. Interestingly, from the purpose of our last paper, where the complaint was that that you would get an increase, further augmentation of fat oxidation after the first week.
And so briefly, though, for people who hadn't seen the first paper was criticized because it was too short.
Too short.
And so the thinking was that they weren't fully induced into...
They weren't fat adapted.
They weren't fat adapted in
Yes.
a ketogenic state. So that would not be the case here, because
Right.
most people would agree that fat adaptation occurs before 2 months.
Or at least 1 month, right?
Right.
So they're on the ketogenic diet for the
I'm
1
sorry,
month
that's right,
period.
yes.
But interestingly, you'll notice that all of the adaptation occurred within the first week. So 24-hour RQ goes down and it stays down. It does not take another nosedive, as one might have hypothesized. If you had further fat adaptation after the first week, you got all of it within the first week. So our conclusions are, this is an inpatient controlled isocaloric ketogenic diet. Got small increases in energy expenditure, basically at the limits of detection using current state-of-the-art methods. Despite the rapid and substantial drop in insulin secretion and an increase in fat oxidation, we saw no augmentation of body fat loss with this low insulin diet. In fact, we saw slowing of body fat loss with the ketogenic diet. And really, our data don't support any sort of large magnitude changes that are really physiologically significant in terms of augmentation of energy expenditure that have been hypothesized in the past to be the metabolic advantage of low-carb.
Question from one of the people who was watching was whether or not, what the average weight or BMI was for the participants, because it's 17 men with overweight or obesity, but it doesn't say what they sort of were.
It's a good point. That was 29 was the mean BMI. They were all class 1 obese or were overweight. So
Gotcha.
the range was 25 to 35.
And so based on this, I take it that this has not increased your buy-in for the insulin hypothesis in terms of what...
I think the combination of these two studies on the metabolic side of things basically falsified the carbohydrate insulin hypothesis.
So that is a very very firm statement, and I won't disagree with you, but when's the paper coming out? People want to know.
It's a good question. So this is, it was just resubmitted to the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition after a round of relatively positive reviews, so I would anticipate probably hearing something positive within the next few weeks.
And there was a question, does this mean the hypothesis is now over? I suspect you would say yes.
I still think that there might be something interesting to say about appetite. It was something that was measured very indirectly in this study, which I'm not presenting the data yet.
Certainly my clinical experience with ketosis would say that it does indeed help with appetite. The issue, of course, that I have with it is that I can't find people who want to live like that forever, which ultimately is what's required if you want to keep the weight off forever.
If you're only interested in losing weight transiently, then maybe a very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet's the way to go, but as Yoni points out, you have to be willing to do something permanently to persistently change your behavior to keep the weight off permanently.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay.
I appreciate that. And for our second, each of us mutually Periscope, I don't think we did that bad. Oh, wait. So, so the question from Catherine was whether or not total protein intake. I mean, I do think protein is important in satiety, but I think ketosis may have a unique contribution to satiety as well. At least that's been my experience. But I'd love to see some head-to-heads in that regard as well.
I think that's an interesting point, and one of the things that's also been shown, and we review this in the paper, is that this is the very first time reducing carbohydrates has been shown to increase energy expenditure, even though it's a very minor amount. Everybody else who's ever shown an increase in energy expenditure, with including Ludwig's group, has had to increase protein at the same time, and we know that protein's thermogenic. So one of the questions is there really a physiologically significant increase in energy expenditure that can be achieved with carbohydrate restriction? I think this basically answers the question. The answer is probably no.
Terrific. My phone's about to die. Thank you,
Okay,
Kevin.
great, thanks. Hey, how are you? Good to see you.